All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It's Lon Strickler. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am so glad you're here. I want to start the show off by thanking Doug Hychek for hooking us up. He did the introduction, and I'm so glad he did because I've wanted to talk to you for so long, and now we're finally here. So let's jump right into it. Let's do the boring stuff in the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about your background and what got you into Bigfoot and the paranormal and cryptids. And then we'll go into your encounters, and then we'll just see where the night takes us.
Well, I've been involved with paranormal practically most of my life. Even as a kid, I'm an intuitive, and I have some clairsentient abilities as well. And when I actually started realizing this, my first encounter with the paranormal, a significant encounter, was at Gettysburg. I was kind of a history nerd when I was a kid, still am, I guess. And I was born and raised near Gettysburg, live there now again. And on summer afternoons, I would ride my bike to the battlefield and spend time there. Very young age, I started doing it. So I think back it was 68, maybe in 1968. I was around 9 or 10. I was 9 or so. And I was in the area where people refer to as the Valley of Death. And that's, for those who know the battlefield, it's that plain between, or valley in between Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the wheat field over by the Rose Woods. And I was on the access road there on my bike, and I had stopped. And then all of a sudden, it was like a big TV screen opened up in front of me, and I was literally seeing, or being part of the battle. I was seeing soldiers. I was hearing gunfire, smelling gunpowder. All my senses were heightened. It was like I was there, and I was quite freaked out. But this lasted about 30 seconds or so, and then suddenly disappeared. And I was kind of taken back by it, though in a way I wasn't surprised by it. I had seen things in the past, not necessarily there, but that was kind of really the confirmation that something was different. So ever since that time, I spent a lot of nights there on that battlefield when you could sneak on there and not get thrown off. And myself and several friends used to camp out there at night, and we saw a lot of different things. And so, I was very interested in that. And as I grew older, right toward my senior year, and right after I got out of high school, I moved to Baltimore, or near Baltimore, and lived down in Maryland for about 40 years after that. But I was up here in Maryland doing cases, and doing, investigating for people as far as businesses and individuals' homes and such. It was kind of a word of mouth thing back then, because, being a paranormal investigator was, you didn't really talk a whole lot about that. That was really new, nothing like it is nowadays. So, I did that for a long time. And then I was living in Sykesville, Maryland, which is just west of Baltimore. And I was fly fishing on the South Branch of the Patapsco River, which I've done a lot of fly fishing. I used to travel over the east doing that. And but this is a location I've been at before and knew it very well, and had a Bigfoot encounter. That was May of 1981, May 9th of 1981. And after that had occurred, of course, I honestly didn't really realize what I was looking at, but I had an idea of what it was. And since it was so close, I became very interested and I wanted to find out more about it. So that basically started my cryptid interest. And it's just part of everything I do now.
Well, before we go any further, let's talk about the details of your Bigfoot encounter. What were
Okay.
you doing and what happened during the encounter?
Well, I was about a mile downstream from Slikesville, and I was in the river, and that part of the river, it's not really large. It's almost more like a creek more than anything else. But I was in the water and I was fly fishing, and it was early morning, about 10 o'clock in the morning. Nice May spring day. And I happened to notice on the north bank across from me that there was a dog, kind of a large dog moving around in the weeds. And I didn't pay him any mind, but I did when he let out a whelping sound. And I looked over there. And when I did, something stood up in the weeds. And the weeds were pretty high. I'd say they were about 4 foot high, if not higher. And this thing stood up, and I got a good look at it from its mid torso up. So this thing I knew was huge. It was dark, hair covered, but I didn't really see. I couldn't really determine what it was, though I know it was bipedal because after it stood up, it started walking towards my left, and it walked out of the weeds onto the bank of the river. There's just, it's a stone bank there. And this thing stood and was standing there looking at me. I was about 40 foot away, so we were very close. And I'd say it was about 8 foot high, 8 foot tall, maybe more. Very muscular, hair covered, dark brown hair cover, kind of matted. But the one thing I did notice more than anything was its face was similar to what people would refer to as a Neanderthal or something like that. It had the real deep eyebrow, and had like a conical head, but it was the skin was dark in color, and it was just standing there looking at me. Definitely male, because I could see the genitalia. I could make that out, and it was making like a ticking sound. I don't know why. Maybe it was nervous or something, or didn't understand what it was looking at. It was looking at me or whatever, but it was making a ticking sound, like it was gnashing its teeth. And we watched each other for about 10 seconds, and then it just turned around and walked swiftly up into the woods. So after that happened, I made my way out of the river, went up to my car, and the road itself was kind of elevated above the river, so I had to walk up on the road. And I got in the car, took off back towards town, and got to the first phone I could find. And it's only like a 3 or 4 minute drive. And I got on the phone with the Sykesville Police Department, and told them what I saw. And I don't know, I can't really gauge what kind of reaction they had. Though I did find out later that there had been Bigfoot sightings in the area before. But I didn't know that because I had just moved down there maybe 4 years previous, and I had never heard of any Bigfoot sightings. So anyway, they told me, they said, well, go back to the area where it happened at and wait for police. Well, I didn't really want to go back there. I didn't know if this thing was going to be there or not, but I went back. And when I pulled up, there was a wooden barrier across the road. And there was a Maryland State Police officer standing there. And I rolled down my window and told him who I was. I made the report. And he said, you got to leave. You can't be here. So, okay. So I turned around and got out of there and went back home. So, I guess about an hour later, I went ahead and decided, well, I'm going to drive on back there and see what's going on. So I did. And when I got there, I mean, there were cars everywhere. And in fact, I had to park up the road about a quarter mile away and walk up because there was that many cars. And when I got there to the barrier, there was a Howard County police officer standing there. And I asked him, well, why is the road blocked? Well, what's going on? He said, he started laughing and said, somebody said they saw a Bigfoot. And I said, okay. But, as I was standing there watching, there were people going into the woods with dogs and such. There were a lot of searchers, and they had a big white tent set up on the other bank where I had seen this thing. And and all the jurisdictions were there. And at that time, the old Wagoneers they used to drive, the Fed used to drive these black Wagoneers. And there were two of them sitting there. And all the police departments were there, all local police departments, and I heard helicopters. I didn't see any helicopter, but I heard them. So I stood there for about another 10 minutes or so, and I thought, well, I don't need to be here. I'm going to go on back home. So I went on back home because honestly, I didn't really want anybody questioning me or anything. So I went on back home, and when I got home, I called the local, the Baltimore TV stations, the 3 network stations, and I called each of them, and they were all interested. They said, well, we'll give you a call back a couple of days after we hear something and talk to you. I said, okay. So about 5 days later, I hadn't heard from anybody. So when I did what I did, I called one of the stations and told them who I was, and I had called and inquired about it, and the news editor was on there. He said, yeah, well, I don't want to talk to you, and hung up on it. So I didn't know what was going on. So, but I did find out later that there had been a sighting of this thing downstream a few hours earlier. I later found that out through BFRO years later, but I found out also from a police officer in Sykesville that there had been another report. And he verified everything that day. And then after this occurred, I was talking to a gentleman who I worked with who actually lived in one of the areas where a lot of these sightings were back in the early 70s. And back then they were calling it the Sykesville Monster. And he was relatives with a lot of people who lived down by the river, and they had their houses broke into and chicken coops and such being broke into. So I got some exclusive interviews with people who had seen it and had reported, and also those who had talked to the press back then. So, I mean, I kind of caught the bug right there. And, I started looking deeper and deeper into that phenomena there in around Sykesville. And I still do. I mean, I get a lot of people make inquiries about it and still talk about it to this day. After my sighting, there had been 4 other Class A sightings with BFRO there as well. So I think the last one was maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And I have talked to people who had other sightings along that south branch and even into the mainstream of the river. And there's something still around, even though it's more, it's no build up than what it used to be. But yeah, there's still activity around there.
It amazes me, particularly with Bigfoot, right? And all the other stuff that we'll get into during the interview. But I just did a show and put it out today on the Bridgewater Triangle, and all of the tons of things that are going on in that area. And one of the things and one of the angles that I sort of attacked on that is that I think in general, there's a lot of places that we could go in the United States and maybe across the country and draw out a 200 square mile triangle, and you're going to find all kinds of weird shit that goes on, right? You're going to find Bigfoot encounters, missing people, the whole gamut. But in particular, with like Bigfoot sightings, when you have multiple people reporting seeing something and they're describing the same thing, there's got to be something to it. So when you got into the Bigfoot thing, obviously you had this encounter and it sort of sparked your interest, and you were already interested in the paranormal in general. Over the years, even in that situation and since then, you're doing these investigations. Why is it that we have, and I had another interview today with a cryptozoologist, Ryan Edwards, who's written a couple of books, and we were having this really heated conversation about this because I'm at this point with Bigfoot in particular and these other cryptids. I'm so frustrated with the fact that it's 2022 and we don't have any more definitive evidence that these things are real than we did in 1967 or 1958 or 1901, or just pick the date, right? So, in your experience, before we move on for the Bigfoot thing, let's talk about your experience in these reports that you've taken. What is your idea on these things, and why are they so difficult to prove that they actually are real?
Well, most mainstream cryptozoologists, even though they may think in a bit that there's something paranormal or supernatural going on with these beings, I definitely believe there is. Uh, Interdimensional, yeah, it's very possible. I believe, in fact, I think most cryptids have interdimensional and other supernatural abilities. The fact that we don't have a body or any real physical evidence, I think, speaks to that. You hear so many times from witnesses and experiencers where they will literally be tracking one of these beings and this thing just suddenly disappears out of nowhere. I mean, it just vanishes. And that happens all the time. People do tracks and track, and all of a sudden the tracks end, like this thing sprouted wings and took off. I think they have have some type of access to possibly portals or some way of camouflaging themselves. Uh, I think there is something to that. And with the evidence that I've gotten over the years and other evidence I've seen from other individuals, it seems to me that there is something to that. Though at this point we just can't prove it. It's all theory, and it's all conjecture. But I think in more cases than not that this is what's going on. And as I've investigated this, Bigfoot and other cryptids, winged humanoids and upright canines, dogman, the whole thing, I think they all have this ability to some degree. And I think they have other abilities as well. So I think they do have some type of ability to allow only certain people to see them. And I have some instances of that where there have been a crowd of people and only a few people saw it, even though they're all looking in the same direction. And yeah, I mean, I think there's just something beyond just the old flesh and blood theory. I mean, there's, I've got a team that works with me, and some believe in that, and some are your standard investigators who believe that it's all natural and there's nothing supernatural about it. So, there's a lot of varying opinions. Though I have known people who have done this for years who have started to open up to the supernatural aspects of it. So it's a mixed bag, but I think that's the avenue where it's going to be coming down to eventually.
I tend to agree because I started the show and I have never been one to shy away from any of the woo or any of the
Mhm.
other interesting things that happen when people have these sightings, and some of them are happening almost simultaneously on habituation sites and other things like that. But it's my cop brain from so many years in law enforcement always tells me, go to Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is is what it is. It is the explanation. But at the same time, it's like you said, the more I've had conversations with people, Carter Bouchard comes to mind. I've had Carter on the show, and he's had some weird experiences in the
Yeah,
woods.
Carter's on my team.
Yeah. So, you know, I've talked to Carter a couple of times, even off the air, and I've had him on at least twice on the show.
Mhm.
And he's had some weird shit happen to him. And he's talked to people that have had even weirder things happen to them,
Mhm.
right? So, and when you have those conversations with people that I trust, like Carter, I consider a friend and I trust him. Doug Hycheck's another one that comes to mind. Doug's had some weird experiences. But as you were talking, you know, when you have conversations with the strictly cynical people or the very skeptical people that are just flesh and blood, it's got to be only a flesh and blood creature. There's no other, no other explanations. It's very difficult to have any other kind of conversations with folks because you get into the point where you're starting to explain an unexplainable thing with another unexplainable thing.
Mhm.
But to that point, there are people that I have had on the show that I know for a fact have had encounters with these things. They will send me photos and they'll send me videos and they will swear, they will circle and point to exactly where this creature is. And I don't see anything.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. I think it happens all the time.
right, and we make fun of it. It's a big thing. The circle squatch or the big red circle squatch or the blob squatch that people are always talking about in the community. I've had that theory, and you're the only other person that's ever really said that on the show, particularly.
Mhm.
I've had it in the back of my mind. I've just never said it out loud. What if, just what if, it's possible that they are seeing something that is there to them that's not there for us because I'm not supposed to see it?
Yeah, I think that happens. I mean, this investigation we've been doing in Chicago with the winged humanoids, the Chicago Mothman. You know, we've been on this thing ever since the beginning of it, and it's become apparent to myself and others on the team that some people see it and some don't. I mean, they could be standing there in open area looking in the same place and they don't see a thing. And then another person, maybe someone with them, will see it and absolutely describe it to a T. And as you go along, you start getting more and more descriptions. We're up to 147 now sightings since 2011 of these beings in the Chicago or Chicagoland area. And I mean, and these are, I mean, a lot of them we've thrown out. I mean, so these are ones that we believe are valid. And it's very similar in scope. I mean, in the way the things react, the way they make themselves seen and accessible to these witnesses. It's almost like they want them to see them. So, yeah, I think there are certain people who have the ability to see it, and I think these beings also know that, and that's why they make themselves known.
Before we get into the winged humanoids, I want to
Hmm.
sort of close out the Bigfoot thing because that's another thing that I've had conversations with. I'm always asking questions and always asking why. People write me emails all the time. They're like, "You're always saying you don't know. You're always asking why." Well, because I don't know. And here's the other thing about Bigfoot: if this thing is so freaking elusive and we can't find them anywhere and prove that they actually exist out of these fleeting moments of, the Patterson Gimlin film in 67 and other people who have claimed to caught them on video and pictures throughout the years. And I've seen some that are very compelling.
Hmm.
But in general, we don't have any definitive proof. If these things are so elusive, then how is it I've interviewed, at least I can think off just the top of my head, I'll say 10 people, some that have been on the show, some that haven't, that have been driving down the road and almost freaking hit these things because they're crossing the road
Hmm.
at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Hmm.
you know it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, that type of behavior, and it's almost like you're not supposed to see them and they're surprised that you're seeing them at the time, is the only other theory that I've come up with.
Well, I do believe that these uh, these hairy hominids do actually live on our Earth plane in some areas. The Pacific Northwest is in particular. I believe there are pods and family groups and habituation areas along the coast up there, and also down in Florida with the skunk apes, and along the coast, along the along the Gulf Coast. There's sites, into East Texas. But for the most part, even though there have been involved with some habituations in the Maritimes and in Canada and up towards New England, but overall throughout the United States and Canada, I think most of these are singular beings that have the ability to come in and out, and they're just to make themselves known to certain folks. And I think that's just one part of their ability. I think they for the most part reside on another dimension, them and other cryptids. And I think since they do have the ability to come in and out, I think they do. For whatever reason, we had no idea why they do it. But since the sightings for the most part are fleeting sightings, and it's hard to get and even get photographic evidence for the most part, but physical evidence is almost non-existent. So yeah, there's something about it. I mean, there's something there that we just don't know yet. And but even those areas where we do believe, or many of us believe, that there are beings that reside on this earth plane full time, they're elusive as well. So can they cloak themselves, and can they, when they die, somehow hide themselves or hide their bodies and such? Yeah, I think they do have that ability. And when they live in areas that are so dense, I think they can do that. But the ones we see out in the open, and I think a lot of those are supernatural beings.
Interesting theory, man. I like I said, I've went back and forth. 5 days out of 7, I'm the strictly, they're just flesh and blood. There's nothing to the woo. It is all coincidence. Because you talk to those people that have these things on their property, and they have the orbs, they have lights, they have UFOs and other things going on. But as Preston Dennett, I've had on the show before, Preston tells me everything's connected.
Oh, it's all connected. Yeah, I have no doubt of that. When most of the times you get involved with a case, and it can be a case about any type of unexplained activity, different aspects of the paranormal always sneak themselves in there. I mean, Bigfoot, orbs, UFOs, other cryptids. There's usually something else as well. And that has become more prevalent as time has gone on. So yeah, I think there's a clear connection between the paranormal and all the different phenomena.
Well, let's move into another cryptid that has always fascinated me, and I know that you had your own experience with some sort of a winged humanoid. Would you tell the audience about your experience with that?
Yeah, it was 1988, fall of 1988. I was living outside of Baltimore, and I was at an exposition over at Timonium Fairgrounds, and it was something to do with Boy Scouts. And I ran across the guy I went to school with, and I was actually in Boy Scouts together in Pennsylvania, and he was down there, and we hadn't seen each other in, I'd say about 12 years or so. So we got to talking, and he knew I was involved with the paranormal because we actually used to spend time out in the Gettysburg battlefield as kids. So he was aware of a lot of what I had done. Anyway, he asked me, he said, a friend of mine and I are going to be going up the old Camp Conewago next weekend because there have been some strange things going on up there, and we're looking into it for the council. Troops have been camping out in the woods of Camp Conewago, and they've been packing up early and leaving and swearing they're hearing these screaming sounds. I mean, to the point where it's scaring them and they're just leaving. And he said that was going on all through the summer, and that they were going to go up there. And now this is October, and they were going to go up there and investigate it. He wanted to know if I wanted to tag along. So yeah, I said, sure. That was a time in my life when I was young enough that I didn't mind sleeping on the ground at night. So, never do that now. So anyway, I met them that next Friday. And, this is an area I hadn't been to in a long time. And, but anyway, so we met there and we started hiking into the woods, and we went into one of the campground areas. And it was right along the Conewago Creek, and there was a trail there between the creek and the campsite. And we set up our tents, got everything all set up. And I guess by about 6 o'clock, we were just sitting down cooking dinner and sitting around talking football and all that other stuff. And it was a quiet night. Nothing really happened. I guess we went to bed, or I guess because we had 3 different tents. I think we all fell asleep by about 10 or 11. So the next morning we woke up, and the other guy did mention that if any of us heard anything walking through the campsite, I said I did, and I thought maybe it was one of those guys getting up to relieve themselves or something. But apparently the other 2 guys had heard it as well. So, but nothing seemed like it was disturbed. So I didn't think anything. I thought maybe it was a deer or something else coming in, and there's a lot of wildlife. So that day, that Saturday, we hiked into the woods and up along all the trails and stuff by the game lands and towards the Gettysburg area, and then walked back. And we were out all day. And so I guess we were out about 6 or 7 hours, got back to the campsite. And it was about 6 in the evening, just starting to turn dark. And we sat there and were eating and talking football and stuff again. Nothing was going on until about, I think it was about 11 o'clock. And we heard this screaming sound. Now, it was pretty innocuous. I mean, it could have been an animal or anything, a lot of things scream. Bobcat, or I don't think we had coyotes around here at that point, but it could have been even rabbits scream, deer scream. So I didn't think much of it. And they didn't either. So we just sat around. We didn't go to bed. I figured we're going to stick around a little longer, see what happens. So I guess about an hour later, we heard this really horrific scream. And this thing sounded like it was coming from deep in the woods, but it was kind of moving around, like it was flying around or, coming in and out. So that kind of perked our ears up. And we decided, well, we're going to stay up the rest of the night and see what happens. So, okay. So we're sitting around the campfire. After a while, I needed to get up and stretch my legs, and I got up and started walking towards the trail. And it was really a bright night. I mean, the moon, I don't think it was full, but it was pretty bright that night. So you could see into the woods and see along the creek and everything. But I had this feeling that something was watching us or something was going on. I had this really weird feeling. So I walked back to the campfire and I told those guys, I said, look, let's grab the flashlights, go out on the trail and walk up and down a bit. We weren't doing anything else, so that's what we did. So we went up there single file along the trail with the creek right beside us to the right. And we didn't get 50 foot away. And we saw this thing standing in the creek. And the first thing we saw were the bright red eyes. And this thing was dark. I'd say it was about 6 foot. It's standing right in the middle of the creek. It's very low at this time of year. And by the time we got the flashlights on this thing, it jettisoned itself up into the air. And I mean, it was an audible whooshing sound. And then as it reached its apex, it screamed out, terrible scream, and started flying away. Well, that was interesting. So we hauled back to the camp. And my buddy wasn't talking. He was freaked. I guess we were all freaked. And the other guy mentioned to me, he said, did you see anything on its back? And I seen some structure on the back, but I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was wings. But I never saw anything unfurl, when this thing took off. But yeah, so my friend eventually spoke up. He said, why am I sleeping here tonight? I'm going up the administration building. So him and the other guy went up the administration building and stayed up. I stayed at the campsite because I wanted to see what this thing was. And but I didn't hear anything or see anything the rest of the night. So the next day we packed up and left out of there. But I never really talked a whole lot about it. I had talked to a few people locally about it at the time, but I didn't really say much. So and from what I understood, there were still screaming sounds being heard for over the years. So about 20 years later, in 2005, I started the blog, Phantoms of Monsters. And after a couple of years doing that, I decided, well, I'm going to go ahead and write this thing up, this sighting, and put it out there see if I get a response on it. And I did. A guy who lived not far from where we were up at Dick's Dam said he'd been hearing those screaming sounds for 20 years and he never knew what it was, but he described it to the sound to a T. So he'd been hearing that. Then not long after that, I got another email from a scout leader who had just been up to Camp Conewago with his troop. And he said one Saturday afternoon, the kids were screwing around on the trail, and kids they just go out there and walk around and do stuff. And he said they all came screaming and running back to the campsite, telling him that they saw a dragon. He thought they were pulling his leg. So he said they were dead serious, and they were kind of freaked for the rest of the weekend. But he didn't think anything of it until he saw my article, or was referred to my article, and he said, now maybe they did see something. So since that time, I've had several reports up and along the Conewago Creek, along its length. Now, the Conewago Creek from the campsite kind of runs a little bit west and turns and goes east. And about 15 miles later, it empties into the Susquehanna River. So I have had sightings along that creek at different locations, mostly where roads intersect with it or bridges intersect with it. People have seen it along the stream and out into the fields along the stream, but fairly similar: red eyes and huge wings and humanoid. So, and I'd always been aware of the Point Pleasant Mothman, and I knew that story and everything, but I really didn't look into it. But after that, I started looking into it. Then, of course, we started hearing about these sightings in Chicago, and that Chicago area and the states around it have always had a history of winged beings, thunderbirds, pterodons, humanoids, the whole nine yards. There's a lot of different stuff that's been seen there. And so there is a tradition of sightings. Of course, Chicago is well known for a lot of paranormal activity, but also UFO activity along the lake. So, the fact that these sightings, for the most part, have been very similar to what I saw at the camp. So, I don't know. Is there some kind of connection there as to why we're getting these reports? And I had that encounter. I don't know. There may very well be a connection or a reason. Well, we've been investigating it intently since 2017. Though I started actually reporting on it very early when MUFON got the first reports in 2011.
So, for folks that aren't familiar, I guess basically in a nutshell, these people in the Chicago area are seeing basically what you described. It's some large winged humanoid type creature.
Mm-hmm.
That has always fascinated me, along with Dogman, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about as well. It's one of those things that it just doesn't compute. Like you go back to Bigfoot for a moment, and it makes sense to me that somewhere along the line, maybe something like Bigfoot existed, and it's sort of a leftover relict, hominoid, hominin, whatever the case may be. But these winged humanoid creatures, that seem to defy gravity and to defy the laws of nature in a lot of cases. Like you said, this thing just shot up into the air without unfurling any wings that you saw.
Mhm,
That doesn't even make sense, right? Even if it's a
mhm.
large winged humanoid and you didn't see the wings unfurl, I mean, there's so many questions. So you guys have been investigating this for a long time. Let's just cut to the chase and let me ask the question of you. What do you think these things are and where do you think they're coming from?
I think they're, more recently we've gotten some evidence that we believe they're ultra terrestrials, and I believe they come very well be coming from the same linear dimension which these other cryptids are coming from, and that the portal in which they're coming into, I think the known portal, the one that we do know of, is at O'Hara International. There's a cemetery at O'Hara, which a lot of people don't know about, but it's been there since they built it. And I believe that that portal is in the area of the airport. I mean, of the cemetery at the western side of the airport by the cargo area. Um, it seems to be leaning that way, and we've had some instances where there has been some cursory contact with these beings. They describe themselves as ultra terrestrials. Uh, but everything that the little information that we have been given points to them being an ultra terrestrial being, an interdimensional being. And even though the sightings and the descriptions do vary to some degree, for the most part, they're usually around the same. Not all of them have red eyes. Some of them do. The wing structure is, for the most part, is a bat wing or gargoyle wing type structure, membrane wing. They run anywhere from 5 to 6.5 foot, maybe 7 foot, very thin, very emaciated looking. Uh, and they do have the ability to fly off without the use of the wings, though some do use the wings sometimes. So, and the sightings, most of the sightings have been within the city, in the suburbs, but we've had sightings as far north as Milwaukee and into southwest Wisconsin, throughout Illinois, and into Indiana. And yeah, I mean, we take we take reports like a 250-mile radius of the city, but there have been reports of these sightings, these things beyond that as well. Of course, you talk about Doug. Doug had his sighting up in Minnesota, or in his counter in Minnesota. And we've heard of very similar sightings on highways where these things kind of swoop down on cars in southern Illinois and other areas as well. So yeah, I mean, that happens a lot. So we do take reports of flying humanoids from all over, and it's not that we just concentrated in the upper Midwest. We look into all of the sightings now.
So when you say portal, right?
Mhm.
There's certain things that come to mind visually for folks, and you mentioned cursory contact with these things. Let's dive a little deeper into that, pun intended, into the portal.
Mhm.
When you say portal, are you talking about something that's physically visible? Is it something that's people are connected to spiritually? And I'm assuming you're talking about like a telepathic or a spiritual type of psychic connection with these things that people have been able to communicate with them.
It's an intuitive and psychic connection. I have several gifted people that work on our team. We have two ladies in particular who have had very strong contact with them, and two other gentlemen on the team who have had some cursory contact with them, and one was physical actually. And they have recently been making contact with me, but not to the degree I am satisfied with, and I'm working on that. We're trying to strengthen our contacts and connections. There have been some fallbacks uh, since we started, realizing that they were there. But it's like baby steps. I mean, you gotta build trust, and but we're learning more every day. And I we have had a couple of we have made a couple of shows on my radio show about this with the ladies who have been involved with this, and some of the people, other people who have been involved with this. And we will have another follow up not too long, because we are learning more things, and we're finding other connections as well. You know, that's one thing about all this. You never stop learning, and you know, if you don't have an open mind, I don't really think you're going to learn much. You got to kind of be open to all of it, and you know, every once in a while something will fall in your lap, and the light bulb goes off, and you think, huh, maybe that's a good way to start looking into it, looking deeper into it. So you know, and it's a very interesting. The whole Chicago sighting thing has been quite surreal in a way, but those around the airport have really opened up the whole thing to us. We've had a lot of professional people at the airport who have come forward, despite the powers that be at the airport trying to keep it hush hush and threatening employees. I mean, that's been going on now for a good 2 years. But we've had air traffic controllers, pilots, baggage people, supervisors, you know, people that work in the cargo area, in mechanics and such. We've had sightings from all these people. They have been warned, all of them, not to say anything, but there's a few brave ones that come forward. We've even had TSA security and airport security come to us as well. The truth's getting out there. Now, you know, we can take it as far as we can. We're you know, we're very confidential about it. We don't disclose names. But as time goes on and the more we learn, we're going to put something together to try to prove to the general public what's been really going on out there. And it's a work in progress, but we're continuing at it.
Well, I definitely think it's fascinating. Have these things been caught on camera? Have people caught them on film?
They have, and the ones out at the airport have been confiscated. There have been people who were threatened bodily by security out there who had taken pictures on their cameras and such. Somebody said they had a video, and it was wiped out. I mean, I was hoping they could have put it up on the cloud before it got wiped off, but that wasn't the case. But I believe we've had enough anecdotal evidence to this point to where we can really start getting a good sense of what these things are and what they do. I do know one thing. They're actually, when they come onto this airplane, they show themselves in a different manner than what they really look like. That has been described to us. And we have had sketches made according to what they have told us. And we do display those on the website. And you know, this is this is ongoing. I want to get this right. I just don't want to have this by fly by night. And of course, we've been doing this for all these years, so you know, we're going to stick with it. But you know, I'm at the point now, and of course, we got a lot of detractors. I mean, a lot of people think we're absolutely nuts about this, but you know, I'm at the point I rolls off my back now. I don't care. You know, I'm too old to worry about what other people think about this, and I'm just looking to find the truth. I'm not out to make money or anything else. I just want to put it out there and, you know, give people the opportunity to determine what, you know, to give their assessment as to what they think is going on with what we provide with them. And we encourage people that do have encounters to let us know about it.
Well, I can't wait for you to get the answers because it's something that's bugged me for many years with the Point
Mm.
Pleasant Mothman and those stories. And those things have been seen, like you said, in tons of states. It's not just that area. And I've never been able to really wrap my brain around it. It's
Mm.
similar to Dogman. Have you had many encounters and situations where with Dogman encounters, do you think it's pretty much the same thing? Is it
Yeah,
like
I think it's the same type of phenomena. Uh, my my associate Butch Bukowski, who recently passed away, and I have been were looking deeply into this in Pennsylvania, and there have been a lot of sightings in Pennsylvania. I mean, but there, there've been sightings everywhere. I mean, the Midwest and in the East, there's the most of the sightings of these things, and there's something going on. I mean, and the descriptions are these huge upright canines, almost like what you see in the underworld movies with the lichens. In fact, that's what we call them in Pennsylvania, lichens. And but I think there's a very strong supernatural aspect to them as well. Many times people talk about Bigfoot having an infrasound or have the ability to have some type of ESP or psychic connection with people who are looking at them. I'm pretty sure that these upright canines have the same ability. We've had hunters that literally walked up on these things. Even though they're armed, they wouldn't dare take a shot at it. They just drop their guns and, to their side and just back off. And they tell us it's almost like I had that sense, even though I'm scared to death, I had that sense to just be calm and back away. And these beings hold their ground, but they're not aggressive for the most part. But they do all they can to deflect any type of real encounter.
Yeah, I've only had one person on the show in all the interviews that I've done that came forward and said she had like six encounters with these dogman type creatures, ranging
Mhm.
from when she was a child up until adulthood. And I believe that she's had some sort of encounter. I just
Yeah,
don't know what it is. It's just, it
she's
makes no
probably
sense.
susceptible to having these encounters. I mean, there are people that I believe uh are susceptible or allowed to see these things, and I hear that a lot from people who have had multiple encounters. Nobody else in their family has, but they do for some reason, and they're very believable.
Yeah, one of the questions I asked Anne when I had her on the show was I said, and I've asked that of alien abductees on the show as well, like,
Mhm.
why you? Why have you had these six encounters with this dogman creature? And very few people ever do. And her answer was interesting. She said that she had some Native American blood, she had gypsy blood in her family, and she believed that it was part of her heritage that they had this sort of connection with these creatures. Who might argue with that, right?
Yeah, I think there are physical and ancestral traits that do make people more apt to have these encounters. Absolutely.
Well, I want to move into the UFO thing, right? That's the other
Hmm.
thing. I've had an experience. I've had experiences that I believe may be related to Bigfoot. I don't know, but I know for a fact that I've seen a UFO. I saw
Hmm.
an unidentified flying object when I was 16. I don't know if it was a little gray or green man flying it, but it was unidentified and it was flying. And I don't think it was of this earth. So, I'm very interested in UFOs. I had a guy reach out to me recently. He's an actor that he just did a documentary. It's on, I don't remember what, it's on Hulu or Prime or one of those. It's Alien Abductions Answers, John
Hmm.
Yost. And I watched it the other day. And it's a very interesting take on the whole situation. Obviously, he's had encounters himself and abduction incidences over his life, ranging back from childhood. I know you've had dealings with people who have had alien abduction stories. And I
Yeah, and
know,
I've had personal abductions as well.
please tell us about it because
Well,
I'm fascinated by the subject. And you know, obviously my brain, when I talk to those people, the skeptical part of me, the cynical part of me goes to, was it sleep paralysis? How do you know you were abducted? Those kind of questions fall into my mind. And then I listen to the story. So I'll shut up and you and you tell us your story if you wouldn't mind.
I actually wrote a book about it, Alien Disclosure. experiencers expose reality, and it's just about cases I have been involved with and individuals I've been involved with, and a little bit about what I went through. But basically, I have never seen a UFO. Let's put it that way, or what I consider to be a UFO. There's a lot of lights and stuff out there, and orbs, and but as far as a craft or distinguishable craft, I don't think I've ever had that. But I think there are a lot of people who have had alien, extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, multidimensional encounters and just never realized it. And I think that's most of the case now. And in fact, most of the abductions that we hear about nowadays is mostly at-home abductions, where either the encounter is done at the home or they're taken either physically or ethereally to another location. Now, in my instance, I was this was back in 2015. My wife was suffering from colon cancer, and there was a lot of stuff going on. I was seeing that whole year, I was seeing a lot of references and actual owls. Now, why? I mean, I brought it up with some of my colleagues and asked for their opinion. Nobody really knew much about it. And I documented it, but I was like, every day I was having a reference to an owl. I was seeing owls in areas I'd never seen them before. I was hearing them. And in fact, the one story that kind of bowled me over about this whole thing was the night my wife had passed away. My son and I had been at the hospital. This was in early November. And we had been at the hospital. She was in a coma, and they had just taken her off life support and everything. So we were back at the house, back to the apartment. And when we got out of the car and got to the apartment, there was a barn owl up in the tree in front of the apartment. I had never seen an owl in front of the apartment, but that night there was one out there. And this thing was hooting and hollering like crazy. And for about an hour, it would be hooting out there, and I'm thinking, what the hell is this owl doing out there? Well, after a while, it just stopped and left. And as soon as I noticed that it had left, I got a phone call from the hospital that she had passed. So I had always wondered, what was this actually related to? It was Mike Clellan wrote the book Messengers and the Owls thing, and he and I hooked up and talked about this a couple of times. So I always believed that it was some type of connection I was getting. But also during that year, I had 2 encounters at my home. But my wife was sleeping in the bedroom because she needed to have the bed. So I was sleeping out out in my recliner in the living room. I had 2 encounters where I would wake up and these 3 tall gray beings would be standing beside me. I mean, they were tall. They were close to 8 or 9 foot. They were huge. And I'd look to my left and they would be looking right down at me. Didn't last long, but they just vanished. And of course I'm thinking, well, maybe this is an illusion or something, but it happened twice. So a couple weeks after my wife had passed, I was still out there sleeping on the couch, and I realized something was going on. I didn't wake, but the first time I realized something was going on was I was somewhere else. Now, I don't know if I was on a craft. I don't know if I was sent to another location, but I realized I was standing in front of this big console, and beside me were these 3 beings again, same ones. And I was looking at like a large screen that was showing me historical, what they interpreted as things that had happened in history. And what they showed me was a large, huge craft that had landed in an area where it was told to me it was where the Nile Delta now resides. Then it was way out into the Mediterranean. Well, I was shown different civilizations, how the beings that were part of this craft was the nexus of several civilizations, Mesopotamians, Egyptians, the Greeks, and such, and how they intermingled with the folks that had actually been residing there. And after a while, I remember waking back up in my recliner, but it's daylight, so I'm thinking, well, maybe I slept through it, but there was something else. I had this different feeling. There was something going on here. It's not like I had a dream, because I never remember my dreams, but I remembered every bit of what this thing happened this time. And I just felt different. So I knew something had happened. So that was my actual abduction. Now, something happened to me a couple of years ago where I believe I was abducted by the same beings, but I cannot remember very much of that. So maybe it'll come back to me at some point. But I believe I was being told something. I believe I was being shown things. And for what reason, I don't know at this point. But am I been picked to tell a story? I don't know. But that was my encounter.
Well, you've obviously interviewed other people and talked to
Mhm.
people who have had encounters. What is the strangest or most disturbing encounter that you can recall that other people have had that have shared with you that you've been involved in investigating?
Well, the one that affects me the most is one I wrote about early in the book. Was this woman by the name of Mandy, who lived out in Western Washington, Eastern Washington, very near the Idaho border. And she lived in a small community. Her and her mother lived together. Her father had passed. She was a school teacher, actually. So they had been seeing in the distance towards the east, above the Coeur d'Alene Mountains, they had been seeing a lot of UFO activity. And they've been seeing these red and white orbs or craft or whatever hovering above the mountains for years. And she didn't really think much of it, though. She was wary of it, and she didn't really like it, but she never reported it or anything. She just assumed other people in town had seen it as well, but she never heard anybody talk about it. Well, anyway, one evening, her and her mom were home. They had a late dinner. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening, and they were in the kitchen washing dishes, and they noticed out the window these little red and white orbs all over the backyard, and they kept hearing this popping sound. So she went out onto the back porch, and she noticed that these orbs were colliding with each other and making popping sounds, but there were thousands and thousands of these things up across the yard into the field. She ran into the house, went to the bay window in the living room, looked out, it was in the front yard and in the field across from them. Then the lights went out and the phone went dead. It took about an hour. They'd have it, couldn't call anybody, but then the lights came back on and the phone started working again, and these things were gone. Well, they decided not to call the cops because the cops wouldn't believe them if they didn't see these things floating around. So after that, I think it was probably the next night from what they told, they were having a lot of weird things going on. But one night, they had it, her mother had gone to bed. Yeah, her mother had gone to bed, and Mandy walked up to her bedroom. It was late at night. And she started hearing like footsteps and stuff up in the attic and the roof. And her mother must have woke up from hearing it, and she ran over to Mandy's bedroom, and they were sitting there, and the lights and phone and everything went out. They looked out the window, and these orbs are out there again. But this time they were hearing something scrambling around up in the attic and up on the roof. So they didn't know what was going on. it was about an hour, and they're sitting there scared to death as to what's going on. But then all of a sudden, everything stopped, and the lights and phone came back on. And they're thinking, okay, well, this happened a couple more times. So they contacted a UFO investigator in Spokane, who really wasn't into the alien stuff, and somehow they gave her my name, and they called me. So one night they both called me, and I'm on the East Coast, so of course I'm 3 hours ahead of them. And we talked for about 3 hours on the phone, and they were telling me what was going on when they told me all this stuff. And I had a bad feeling. I thought, well, this thing's going to escalate. I mean, this is just not going to be good. But I didn't tell them because I didn't want to scare them. So what I did tell them, I said, look, just keep a record of what's going on. If now this is back in 2009. I don't think they had I don't think they had a cell phone. I think it was all, it was all landline. But I told them, I said, look, call me tomorrow. Let me know if anything happens tonight. If you can get out to me, if you can call me tonight if something happens. If, somehow you have service. So I said, fine. But, I had a bad feeling about this. So I figured I'd go into more depth with them the next day. But I didn't get a call. And, I'm starting to wonder what's going on. I'm trying to call them, and I'm not getting an answer. I left the message and such. And about 5 days later, on a Sunday, I got a phone call from Mandy's mother. And she said, I'm so sorry for not getting back to you, but there's been a lot going on. I said, well, what's going on? She said, Mandy's missing. Okay. Well, tell me what happened. So she said, the night we talked to you, Mandy went up to her bedroom, was getting ready to go to bed. I was downstairs watching TV. I turned the TV off, walked upstairs, and I saw the light on Mandy's room under the door. I saw she was up. I knocked on the door and then opened the door, and everything went blank. The lights went out, everything. But I reached around and flicked the wall switch, and the lights came back on. But Mandy was nowhere to be found. Now, all her effects were there. Her pocketbook, everything was there. And she went running all through the house, all around the property, yelling for her. Her car was still there because she didn't take off. So the first thing she does is call the police. So of course the police said, well, she's an adult. She probably took off with a boyfriend, this and this and that. And we'll file a report after 2 days, but nothing happened. So she eventually called me, told me what happened. But she just disappeared. And that's been 12, 13 years ago. And I do keep up with the Washington State Police, and there is no record of her, nowhere. Now, her mother has passed away since then. So, she passed not knowing what happened to her daughter. And of course, she's never shown up. There's never been a trace of anything with her. So, I don't know. I did check. I probably checked about a year ago, and nothing. So that's the one that has affected me more than any of them. But yeah, that's one that just didn't come back, and occasionally it does happen.
Yeah, I've talked to several people, like I said, that have had abduction situations and scenarios that have been on the show, and they always come back, fortunately, right? But there is those people that just vanish, and there's really no explanation. You get into the missing 411 stuff, and I don't necessarily subscribe to all of those things being aliens or Bigfoot or, it's sensationalized, obviously,
Sure.
but I just, I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least look at some of those possibly being similar situations to what happened with her. But yeah, that's really strange. That's a weird situation. I don't think I've
Yeah, that's one that's affected me pretty deeply. And I almost quit doing after that happened. I really did. I felt frustrated. I felt guilty that I didn't warn them that maybe something might happen. But what was that gonna prove? That wasn't gonna prove anything. But yeah, that stuck with me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, what else do you have going on now? You've got the phantomsandmonsters.com. Are you writing a new book? Do you have a new book out or something coming out
I'm
in the
going to be
future?
working on a book. It's gonna be a cryptic canine book. Um, some of the work that Butch and I had done together are going to be in that book, and a few other cases I've been working on or have been reported to me. So that'll probably be sometime next year. But I'm busy with the blog every day, and I've been doing the blog now for 17 years daily. I have Phantoms and Monsters Radio over YouTube, and we rebranded that from Arcane Radio to Phantoms and Monsters Radio now, and we're expanding on that. And so I also have the Phantoms and Monsters Fortean Research Team. We have 20 team members, on the ground team members, plus 25 affiliates. So we try to hit every case that comes our way. And of course, the folks that are on that team are not regulated just doing what it's the team. They do their own thing too, of course. Carter, he does his own investigation. But yeah, and we're pretty busy. We keep busy, and I always solicit reports from folks, and we keep confidential information, and we only put out there what you want us to put out, but we try to do our due diligence as far as investigating occurrences, and we're always out there to look and find the truth.
That's what it's all about. Lon
Yeah.
Strickler, I've had a blast talking to you, man. I can't thank you enough for your time, and I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
I will link to everybody in the show notes for everybody who's listening. I'll link to all of Lon's stuff so you guys go over and check it out. That was awesome, man. I will get this turned around here in the next couple of weeks, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to stay in touch, and I'm always looking for stories. I checked out the website a little bit, but if you ever have stories, I do a segment on my show where I just read stories and counter stories.
Mm-hmm.
It is like pulling teeth sometimes for me to get stories to read for story time. So anybody who has stories that they collect that you're okay with me reading, that you can point me in that direction, I always appreciate very much.
Yeah.
And obviously anybody that wants to share their stories on a podcast like this one, you can always send them my way. I would definitely appreciate that as well. But like I said, we'll definitely stay in touch, and I'll shoot you an email when we get ready to air this.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and post it up on the blog then for you.
Awesome, man.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I had a blast talking to you. You have a good rest of your night.
You take care.
All right, you too.
Mm-hmm.